I'm here in the studio with Aaon Koz. We're at House of Honey, just outside of Lagos, Portugal, our new studio. And this is one of the first retreats, and I'm so thrilled to have Aaon here and to get to see your work over the week and meet you in person. It's been such a pleasure, really amazing having you here. So I heard a lot of stories over the week that I wanted to ask about.
Whoa.
Well, nothing like that. No, I just meant you had some really cool stuff to say about how you got into straps, and I would love to share that with other people because I think it's so cool that the way you found straps and why you started doing straps to begin with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I kind of alluded to, it was a little bit by accident and out of sheer frustration with other things that I had been dealing with, which will be revealed shortly. But I started circus, period, moving to San Francisco, house sitting for a family friend for a month, which, you know, housing in San Francisco is not cheap. So I was like, sure, I'll take a month in San Francisco and see what it's like. And then while I was there, I was training at San Francisco Circus Center. I was doing Chinese pole. They were
Was this after university?
Yeah, this was after university. Okay. I had friends in university who did aerial, but at that point in time, I was like, circus is lame. I only do parkour.
Oh, really?
I was shady towards circus. I was like, that's not cool enough. And so after a period of time, I was like, okay, I'll try this thing. I'll try it. I'll see how it is. I tried it in San Francisco. It was super fun. Eventually, they were like, hey, do you want to substitute teach any classes? Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, because they didn't have anyone who was more qualified to substitute teach Chinese pole than I was, as someone who was quite new to it. But I've been teaching movement for a decent amount of time, parkour, other things, rock climbing. So I started subbing, and then they were like, do you want your own classes? And I was like, oh, cool, I'll take my own classes. And I was living in a circus tech warehouse in San Francisco in Soma. Wow. So it was 9 people, 6 to 8 bedrooms. I forget exactly how many.
What year was this?
2014.
Okay.
And since I'd been doing Chinese pole, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get one and rig it into the ceiling in this warehouse. So I built a frame for it, rigged it up, and then after, I don't know, maybe a year of good use, the company that had created it was like, we have reports of faulty this one kind of part, and it's not unsafe, but you should get it fixed. If you don't want to get it fixed, you can return it for store credit. And I thought about it for a little while, and at the time I was being asked to do a performance at this restaurant in SF. I show up, commute there an hour by public transit. They're like, okay, so here's what we're thinking. And I was like, you have no idea how hard it is to rig a Chinese pole. You need tensioned cables bolted into cement or something that is incredibly heavy that's not going to go anywhere. And after 5 minutes of conversation, they were like, yes, we're not going to put big jugs of water or cement, bolt, anything like that. So I was like, all right, rigging Chinese pole is too much of a pain. I sent my Chinese pole back. I used the store credit to get straps because I was like, this is something that fits in my backpack. I didn't know a lot more about it than that at the time. I knew it was kind of hard. And I was like, okay, I'll try learning this. And so that's how I got into straps. At a time when not a lot of people were doing it. Now it's a lot more popular, but so is aerial in general.
Right, yes. Aerial over the last 10 years. I mean, when I started 10 years ago, Instagram wasn't really a thing. And now there's all the self-taught, you just go to Instagram and rig your silks.
Now Instagram's almost not a thing anymore. Now it's TikTok and probably something else soon. But I hear you in that there was no social media learning.
Right.
It was word of mouth. You had a visiting instructor who maybe someone had heard of, word of mouth, teaching new things, but beyond that.
Right, exactly. So it's a completely different world. But one thing I'm really fascinated by, when I looked at your bio and I read about you, you have the Circus podcast, and you have lots of really interesting podcasts about movement and injury prevention and variability and all kinds of scientific work that you bring into the movement and circus stuff that you're doing as a coach. And I would just like to hear how that came about.
The podcast?
The podcast, the idea of bringing really the scientific background into movement, because it's not so common. There's a few people doing this, and it's, I think, as people become more aware of their movement and a holistic approach, but I think there's not a lot of people doing that.
I think it was a combination of a few things. My background academically was psychology and neuroscience, and I loved learning about the research. And I did a little bit of research, both briefly at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, but it was in this brain imaging lab that was the PI was not a bad person. I just was in a dark lab all the time, and I was like, this is not for me. And then I did some research at UCSF, not as a PhD person, just assisting. And in both those settings, I was like, this is really cool to learn about. But I am far too impatient of a person to want to do this for 3 years to get one set of results.
Right.
Where if I learn about research, I can apply it a lot sooner in one-on-one or group settings. And there's always obviously a risk of applying research that is not directly representing a population. So there's not a lot of research on circus and aerial. So we do our best. But that was one half of it. And then the other half was, I don't think I sound great on audio. I'm not incredibly videogenic. But at the time, I was like, someone should start a podcast on circus and the science of circus training, because there's a lot of information out there that I think can support circus training. And at the time, before Instagram, before TikTok, before more and more people kind of systematizing things, you had people passing down knowledge of how to do a thing based on, their singular coach who just said, this is the way we do it. There wasn't necessarily a reason. And maybe that was one right way of many right ways. But sometimes it was, this is the way we do it. It wasn't necessarily the right way for that person or many people. And science had things that could support people learning more effectively, more safely, etc.
I have an example of that from my aerial experience. I injured my shoulder because I never ever heard climb with a neutral shoulder until maybe a year and a half ago. Actually, it was circus mobility with Jessica John. I'm sure you know her work. And I did a master class with her, and it was just so eye-opening that there's all this stuff I was never taught. And it's not that I didn't have a good teacher. It's just that she learned 25 years ago, and it wasn't talked about. So absolutely, there's so many things that can be brought in that are helpful. Is that something you use in the retreat? So you were here for the week with an amazing group, really amazing group. And I watched a little bit of the classes and stuff that you do, but what is special about a retreat versus just a class?
I think with a retreat or an intensive, you have the opportunity to give people layered information in a time frame that is not so long that people kind of stop making connections. So if I provide a concept on day one, people might not immediately grasp every possible application of that concept on day one, because a lot of broad concepts really do apply to so much. But by day 3 or by day 4 or by day 5, we've been working that same idea into a bunch of different skills or sequences or motor patterns, and it can start to click. That can also happen over a long period of time, but I think sometimes having someone bring your attention and your awareness and a framed lesson plan that highlights that concept multiple days in a row without overtaxing your muscles, nervous system, etc., can allow you to really understand, like, oh, now I actually get this. And then after the retreat, they have even more time to let that sink in. But one class, you don't have as much capacity for building layered foundations so that you can start having this complex understanding.
Right. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. So there's a very structured plan in your mind before you start the week. You know kind of what you're going to be bringing up.
Yes and no. I have an idea, but I think the best approach for me is over planning and then each day seeing where there are gaps in maybe something that I planned and that needs to be highlighted more, or maybe in the students that I didn't have an awareness of going into it. Because although I have prerequisite strength and skill and flexibility elements that I think are kind of keeping the group relatively cohesive, there are still things that you don't know about them until they're there in front of you doing something.
Right.
And if you're rigid sticking to a plan that entire time, you don't give yourself the flexibility to support them the way that makes the most sense once you have more information.
Right.
So have a plan, over plan, and then adapt to it as you go.
And what's the most challenging part of retreats in general, or is there a real challenge to that aspect of teaching where you are, it's intense, it's day after day, 5 hours a day is a lot. Physically, it's definitely very challenging. But is there something that is for you really hard about that?
I think the physical element is definitely tiring, but it's not, like if I wanted to and needed to, I could have students demonstrate more, and there's always the ability to use videos or floor drills, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you're injured and you're using videos to teach, that is way smarter and better for your students than you trying to do something through an injury that hurts you, doesn't maybe look the way it might necessarily make sense for it to look. I think on a purely subjective level, like a lot of aerialists do happen to be introverts, and so the social energy is more taxing than the physical. This group, for example, has been incredible. Like they're all super awesome. I think we're all kind of on the same wavelength for the most part of just like social energy, etc. And even so, at the end of the day, I'm still exhausted.
Oh,
and it's not because anyone was bad or annoying. Like not a single time have I been like, oh my God, this student, blah, blah, blah. Like I wish they weren't here. It's just that unless you are super extroverted, it's 6 days with the same people.
right.
And the nice thing about House of Honey is that there's space to spread out. You don't have to all be in each other's space all the time.
Right.
On other retreats, I've been more tired, and people that I've spoken to who haven't been on the retreat but know me literally have said, oh, you seem a lot more like relaxed and less like anxious vibes on this retreat than on past ones. And I think part of that is just like different places in my personal life, but then also just having the time and space to come together and then to take space as needed without necessarily hearing the other people.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that is the tricky bit for me, is how to provide that space where people can come together, but also give them what they need on a personal level. Because you want to have a space where people come together, but also their own space. So I'm still figuring that out. I mean, excuse me. That's still a work in progress, as we've talked about, but let's see where it goes, you know?
I think the most important thing, and this kind of ties back to when I was living in this like big circus warehouse, it was a giant training space, a dining room, a kitchen, and then a bunch of bedrooms.
Right.
And the fact that we all had bedrooms to go back to was critical, right? Because in the common spaces, there were 3 common spaces, right? Dining room, kitchen, living room. And that living room was also the training space. If you didn't want to see people because you were tired or had a long day at work, or just were feeling introverted, whatever, you could go back to your room.
Right.
But that, you need to have a place that feels calm for whatever it is to re-regulate as necessary.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and this, we're lucky that this is a very residential area, so we have lots of choices for accommodation and lots of different configurations. I mean, lucky, and I don't own it all, so
Sure,
it
yeah.
has its challenges.
Pros and cons.
Exactly. One thing I wanted to ask you is, what are your top tips for students to not get injured? What's the best injury prevention for you?
For sure. So the short answer is know yourself. That's obviously easier said than done, and if you're newer to aerial, then it's not necessarily as clear. As an example, someone attending, they know that they tend to throw themselves into tricks and skills maybe more than is inherently, quote unquote, like as safe as possible. So for them, they have to kind of dial themselves back, which is always going to be safer, dialing yourself back. But you're also here to learn stuff. So there are other people who maybe are a little bit more cautious. And those folks, I'm not saying they need to go ham and they need to just like do things that are totally outside of their comfort zone, physically, emotionally, etc. But you want to know if you're someone who's going to jump to the thing or kind of shy back. And then you want to meet in the middle, wherever you are. That's the first thing. The other thing is teaching students and giving them the tools to recognize when they need a break, whether it's an emotional break, they need to eat, they need to go to the bathroom. And I'm not talking like, oh, these are 5-year-old kindergartners who like, oh, we need to remind themselves to like have interoception and be like, oh, do you need a potty break? But more just like giving people the space to do that, and then also giving them the time to check in with their bodies in case something is feeling like, oh, I'm a little bit kind of feeling that in that way, because there's a lot of enthusiasm. The nice thing is most people who are coming on a retreat at this level have had enough time doing the thing where they've built up that internal awareness of how to self-regulate and self-assess, oh, should I push a little bit more or should I chill for the rest of this training class or whatever?
Right. Yeah. Cool. So what's the funniest moment you've had with circus throughout the years, whether it's teaching or performing or on a podcast? What's the quirkiest moment where you said, why am I in circus? What makes me want to do this thing?
Sure. I think you kind of asked two questions there, which is like, what's the funniest moment? And then what's the one that made me go, why am I doing this thing?
Yes.
The funniest moment, which might be the why am I doing this thing, was I was at a performing arts festival outside of Bellingham, Washington, many years ago. It was right when I first started straps. So I maybe had done one performance before, but I don't even think so. And I knew folks who were organizing it, and they were like, hey, we need another aerialist to like improv in front of this electro swing band. And I was like, oh, it sounds scary, but there was a little bit more gentle encouragement, and I was like, okay, I could do that. And then as soon as I agreed to that, they were like, but also, would you consider performing in this like cabaret burlesque show that's another night? And I was like, I just said yes to one. I can't really say no to the other one for some other random reason. I didn't have anything planned. The improv was improv, so I knew I could just do stuff, and it maybe would go terribly, but hopefully not. The other one was supposed to be like an act. And so I was like, okay, burlesque and straps.
Wow.
There was someone else at this performing arts festival and kind of workshopping ideas, and somehow the character that I ended up with, again, I don't really remember exactly how, but this might be one of those moments of both the funniest and also the, like, what is happening right now, was an old, like, Southern cowboy man. The character's name was Uncle Grandpa, which clearly makes no sense. And then I did a straps act as that character. Like, I didn't have a wig, so I just found someone who was making food for the festival and was like, can I have a bunch of flour? And just like put it all over my hair, and it kind of stuck in there. And someone happened to, I don't know why, have an adult diaper at this festival that hadn't been used. And so I found like cowboy hat, suspenders, jeans, like a flannel. And then I ended this burlesque straps act like in an adult diaper in the splits on stage. Yeah, that's probably it.
Okay, I bet the audience absolutely. Do you film of that, or was it like?
There is video footage on YouTube somewhere, but I refuse to reveal how you can find it. If you can find it, great. It's something. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, we're gonna have to look. We're gonna have to dig for that.
The other thing that's a little bit weird about the footage, though, is that the editing, they like sped it up and color tinted it. So I'm not saying the act is incredible. The act is not. But
oh, he's protecting you. He's protecting you.
Stay back. I have a guardian dog.
Charlie, what are you doing? It's okay.
You want to go? Oh.
Look at, he's got his hair up. As if he hasn't known you guys all week. Don't take it personally. He growled at me this morning.
Every time he's with Aaron and I walk up, though, he like gets really upset.
Yeah, it's because he's my protectee dog. Yeah. Oh yeah, anyway, they edited it green and kind of sped it up. So even though the act isn't great, it's weirder looking because of the editing.
Right, okay, all right.
Yeah.
And then did you want to answer that separately, or was that kind of what got you into realizing, oh, it's not as weird as I thought, circus, or it is as weird?
No, it's fully as weird as I thought. I ended in an adult diaper on stage in front of like hundreds of people I didn't know. How could that not be weird?
It's challenging you to take yourself to places that you never imagined going.
Yeah, yes. And also, I had a lot of practice going places I never imagined going in my youth, just through different choices, whether it be like a stupid food eating competition or like a 48-hour scavenger hunt, different bizarre things.
Okay.
So I have never had a lot of shame and dignity, but that was probably the pinnacle of it. It was just, yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about that's important to you as a coach in your career? One thing I did notice this week, and I was just eavesdropping, but I know you had at least one session where you did some creative movement and just go with the music, take it where it takes you on the straps. Is that something that you're developing more at the moment, or it just is part of this work that's really important, is the creative side of it?
Redeveloping would be a good word.
Okay. And
developing it more. I think the nice thing about straps is it can be super systematic and clear. How you go from point A to point B. How you go from point A to point B, at least in my mind, there's like a decision tree of skills. But I think, even though I just told you about really goofy performing, because I didn't have any kind of like societal narrative of like, oh, you're a performer, you're creative, that was never anything I had internalized. So even though I like made a really silly act, and I've made a ton of other acts, I duo act, blah, 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 all this stuff, I think the narrative that I had was, oh, you don't have this like deep emotional thing you need to express, so therefore your voice on stage is not worth putting out there. So my approach to performing was like, I can do some cool stuff and I'll show you if you want.
Right.
So a lot of my acts were more like upbeat, funny, and I think that's fine, but there was never as much comfort as I think there could have been in expressiveness and creativity. Okay. But I don't really perform anymore, so it's more, it's more something I'm working on for the fact that I think is worth working on.
Do you think you'll ever get back to it?
Probably not, because I love going to bed early. Like, most performances are kind of late at night, and I performed, and I would have call at 10:30 and be on stage for 11 or 11:30, and then get home, who knows when.
Right.
And now, like, if I go to bed that late, the next day I'm like, whoa, that was a lot.
Right.
But I also think that, unfortunately, the performing work opportunities are getting worse and worse and worse, especially after the pandemic and with more inflation. So even some of the people that I know who are incredible performers, they're having trouble getting work that is quality work.
And pays probably well.
Exactly.
enough
Yeah.
Oh, shame.
So
Okay.
there's not a lot of like motivation to do it professionally, but for
Right.
fun, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anything else you want to add? You want to say? How was the week at House of Honey?
It was good. I never know what to expect first time, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
Like you were like, I don't know this guy. Although
I liked you.
you had a vibe. Yeah.
I liked you from the
Um,
moment I talked to you the first time. No, I did. I'm serious. Like I don't, I do get to choose who I work with, and I really did. Yeah. I felt
Yeah.
like, okay, we could communicate. You're straight, I'm straight. It goes well. You tell me what you need. I can do that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, again, not having like besides email communication and like maybe one or two phone calls,
Yeah.
I was like, cool, I think this is gonna go well. But each time beforehand, I'm like, if it goes poorly, all the people who just paid a decent chunk of money will not be thrilled.
It was a big leap of faith on your part.
But it went well. I think it went well. I enjoyed it. And
I enjoyed having the group here.
people were safe, people had fun, and I think they learned things.
Good.
So that's like, for me, that's what matters.
And they got to spend some time in the hot tub.
Well, yeah. I include that in the having fun
Yeah.
and learning things, like how awesome the saltwater hot tub is.
Yeah, definitely. You can rethink about all the inflammation that's going down as you're there.
Yeah.
No, but it's been great. It's been great having you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It has been
And
fun.
thanks for chatting with me.
My pleasure.